Hi, good evening. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan, and I'm taking on a big topic this evening. Just in case there are any fact checkers or censorship people watching, this conversation is from a paper. It's from an Italian paper that some people may have already heard about, and it's an important piece of information that we need to address and have needed to address for a long time. And so that you get it clear, we're looking at COVID-19 vaccination, all cause mortality, and hospitalization from cancer, looking at an Italian province. Now, this has been covered by other people recently, and they have very clearly shown what appears to be a trajectory of increased cancer. The sad part is that I had predicted this over 2 years ago, and at that time I was censored for sharing even these concepts. I predicted, based on the extrapolation of the science, this kind of pattern that would emerge. And I'm going to be taking this a little bit further because they are looking at just COVID vaccination. I am looking at specific platforms and looking to try and explain why this could be occurring. So, with that in mind, it's important to understand that what you're hearing here today is right at the front of the science. I'm asking questions that very few people are even thinking about. So you are listening to an important piece of the science that we're studying. Important to reflect on that as part of that extrapolation, I'm also predicting the next viral storm and the fact that it's not likely to be as we think. This is what Gert has been talking about with HIVICRON, but my question is how will it present clinically? You can join me in this presentation by looking in the description below. So let's get back to the information. I'm first going to take you through a bit of the paper. I'm going to highlight to you a very important point, and then most of my discussion will be about trying to explain why I think this is occurring. So this is the important piece of the puzzle. So let's start off with what was said in this paper. As I said, it was an Italian study, and they were looking at a whole province in Italy with regards to almost 300,000 people that they looked at. And they were studying in terms of vaccination status for all cause mortality and cancer. This was a question that we have had for a number of years, and this is where this discussion about turbo cancer and so on exists. I will explain to you what I think is happening and why it seems to be confusing in terms of what exactly is going on. So let's again focus on the details. Now, as I said, they were following people from June 2021. Now, this is important because the study also showed a higher all-cause mortality in the unvaccinated. In June 2021, that was just around the time that the Delta variant was starting to surge. And the Delta variant was a monster of a variant. It was the most lethal. And you have to know by now that vaccination, COVID vaccines, do have an impact on the severity of COVID 19. And so it's no surprise in that context that it would impact on mortality around COVID 19. So that for me is pretty straightforward. Plus, as well, they may bring in points about the healthy vaccinee bias, and there are various things about this that could skew information one way or the other. But the big question is the one we have been following for a long time, which is there an increased risk of cancer? That's the big question. So when they looked at this study, what they found was that, and they put it here, a slightly higher likelihood of hospitalization for cancer, a hazard ratio of 1.23, which means a 23% increased risk, relative risk in terms of what was happening. And it's significant because, as I said, the confidence intervals are quite small and the P factor is quite low. So this is significant information. And I think that a good place for you to watch that analysis could be John Campbell. He recently covered this paper looking at the breakdown with regards to the different cancers and the different risks in the early part 1 vaccine versus 3 vaccines. I don't want to go over that because my expertise is focused in on trying to explain the science of why this is occurring. So I'm not going to spend too much time focused on that aspect. Just know that it showed an increased risk. Now, the first thing that I want you to understand is that when they said the COVID vaccine, what exactly did they mean? Was it whole virus vaccine? Was it protein vaccines? Was it the vector viral vector vaccines like AstraZeneca or J&J? Or was it mRNA vaccines when they looked at this region in Italy? And it's very important because that was the question that I was asking. Hold on. I understand that you see an increased risk, but I need to now know which vaccine were you using in that region. So when we look at the breakdown of the demographics here, and it shows you the overall group, unvaccinated, 1 or more doses, 3 or more doses, and they show you all the numbers. The males, 48.9%, mean age, 49.4% overall. And so it's not an old cohort. And so you can see all the breakdown of comorbidities. Everything is clearly delineated. So the question, as I said, that I wanted to know was which vaccine was primarily used in this region. And this is where you get the answer. Type of vaccine, BNT162b2, that's the Pfizer vaccine. And across the different age groups, it was a 37.5 for the overall cohort. So you see, this is the overall cohort. And as you go down, you can see 37.5% there. And the mRNA, this one, 1273, that's Moderna, 13.3%. Mixed is 31.7%. And you may notice that only a small amount here, only 1%, was that of AstraZeneca or the J&J vaccine. So this suggests, when they said, when you look at this strongly suggests that almost 99% of all the vaccines used in this region of Italy were probably mRNA, either Pfizer or Moderna. And so this is an important starting point. And you'll understand why I've started off with this, because my prediction was based around the fact that I believe, based on the scientific extrapolation, that this risk will be highest with the mRNA technology, not necessarily the spike protein. Now, when they looked at in the conclusion, they were talking about the potential mechanisms. And this is what I'll be going through. But let's see what they were thinking. They thought there could be pro-inflammatory or tumorigenic effects triggered by the vaccine mRNA or the vaccine-induced spike protein. That was one. Two, they mentioned pro-inflammatory action of lipid nanoparticles. That's a possibility. Altered translation of cellular microRNA, reduced interferon type 1 activity, and lymphopenia. That means low lymphocyte counts after vaccination. So these are the 5 reasons, and I think that they were generally correct, but there are a few things that they may have left out, and I think could be quite relevant. So let's dive into what I predict or had predicted before, and this is still an extrapolation of the information as to what I think is going on. When you think of cancer post-vaccination, and they found within 6 months versus 1 year, increased numbers in the 1 dose as opposed to the 3 doses and so on. And so the first question I asked is, why did they see that where there seemed to be a higher number at 6 months than at 1 year? This is where this concept comes about of turbo cancer. In reality, it's not turbo cancer. What it is that they are having advanced stage 4 presentation of disease as the primary presentation. What you have to understand, say for instance, if we use breast cancer as an example, normally what happens, stage 1, there is a lump. Stage 2, it's bigger, it's infiltrating the tissues. Stage 3, it has gone to the lymph nodes. Stage 4, it is then spreading distant to other organs. So the question is, what happens if instead of the breast cancer going through these 3 stages, and this is why you have a mammogram or other investigations to try and pick it up early, it shifts from maybe a stage 2 to a stage 4. It's like it jumps the stage 3. This causes a problem because it means that by the time the person has presented, they already have metastatic disease. That is a different ball game to try and manage because you can't then just do surgical options. You need chemotherapy, radiotherapy. It's not as easy to address. That's what I think they mean when they say turbo cancer. It's not necessarily that the cancer is growing faster, but it is becoming stage 4 disease in a much earlier, much more rapid way. And that's, in a sense, what I think turbo cancer is about. But cancer doesn't just come out of nowhere. So the question is that it's not that the vaccines are causing cancer, but they are accelerating cancer. That's my point, is that this is an acceleration of what has already been there. So people normally always produce cancer cells. It's not surprising. Depends on your general health, levels of toxins or infections, genetic predisposition, and finally immune failure. Every one of these layers has to be broken. I call it the 4 layers of protection. So in effect, the people who would be getting cancer here would have already probably broken through this, but had small cancer. And that's an important point. Rather than it causing cancer, the person already had cancer, but that cancer was accelerated. Very important difference. And there's a reason why I'll be explaining why that happens. Now, one of the reasons, which I'll not focus on too much at the moment, but is relevant because we saw this accelerate pancreatic cancer, is IgG4. Now, we have known about this since 2022, where that the mRNA vaccines lead to significant amounts of IgG4, 45% almost, in patients who have not had an infection of IgG4. These are tolerant antibodies. And when you compare it to somebody who had an infection, normally without a vaccination, it's only 1%, 45 times higher. And this can accelerate cancer because it technically suppresses your immune system. Remember, cancer is technically a form of immune failure because when your body has cancer cells, normally they get killed. Your immune system is very, very effective at doing that. So, the other part, and I think this is probably the more important point, is to do with how the technology actually works. Now, I'm going to take you through a few slides. So you have to understand this to then understand the next section. So firstly, when you are comparing the different COVID vaccines, so for instance, the viral vector versus the mRNA, the difference is that when they're injected, the viral vector vaccines are coated in this adenoviral package, and they go into the DNA, which then transcribes it into RNA, which then produces spike protein and then produces antibody. Okay? When you do the mRNA version, it doesn't need to go in the nucleus because the mRNA, the modified RNA, is now deposited inside the cytoplasm, which it can then directly make spike protein. This is the huge advantage that they are pushing for, which is why they're trying to get mRNA technology as the way forward for the types of vaccines, because it's faster, easier to therefore adjust. So those are the advantages, but what are the disadvantages? And these are points that I've been making now for years. The problem is that when you think about how mRNA, and it's not, let's make it clear, when the viral vector deposits the DNA, which becomes mRNA, that's messenger RNA, which makes a spike protein, and it is very modified RNA, has methyl pseudouridine. It is there because it has to evade the normal cellular things that destroy mRNA to make spike protein. This is a very important point and why they are different. And so this modified RNA is not as easily destroyed. And this may be part of the reason why it produces IgG4 as well. And so when we look at this pattern, this is a critical aspect as to how these vaccines work. And again, just a reminder, you inject the lipid nanoparticle, they go into the muscle cell. These are modified RNAs in there. It will then make multiple spike proteins, which will then trigger an antibody response. It doesn't need DNA, and it is therefore a faster system to produce an antibody response, and sometimes a very powerful antibody response. So that was all good. But here is the problem. As I told you, the cell normally doesn't like viruses or anything else coming inside and just making proteins. It has a number of strategies to address that. And this is what it would look like. So that in effect, if you had this viral or any RNA entering a cell, there are a number of proteins, REG1, MDA5, which will then bind it, trigger an interferon response, which will then block everything up. But they had a problem with mRNA, modified RNA, in a vaccine, because if this was triggered, you would stop it from making protein. So that's why the methyl pseudouridine was used, because it evades this and technically blocks the interferon response, which allows the cell to make the RNA, to make the spike protein. Perfect, isn't it? That's what they would want. They would want this to happen with regards to therefore being able to make the protein that you want. Your problem is that you are interfering with a very important interferon pathway that is both antiviral and anti-cancer. This is the important point. And this is why I was saying from the start, I knew this was going to be an issue. And I don't think they have figured out the way around it as yet. And this is why I keep on calling that you guys, you need to think carefully about how you use the technology, because there are a few hiccups here that are not easy to get around. So I highlighted this interferon suppression because I'm now going to connect it to where cancer is likely to be coming from. So interferon suppression will reduce MIR149. This is another microRNA protein that is able to interfere with the way how tumors can differentiate, and it is there as a blocker. Essentially, it's preventing the tumor cells from differentiating quite well. Because what happens is that if you have too high of this CSF1, it will then trigger tumor cells through the interaction with monocytes, M2 monocytes, to migrate. And that's the cause of metastatic disease. Follow me again. If you block interferon and you inhibit proteins like this, you increase the possibility that tumor cells supported by M2 macrophages to spread to distant organs, therefore increasing the risk of metastatic disease. Now, I can't emphasize, this is a slightly bigger image so that you can see it, and the principle is the same. What you don't want is you don't want these cells promoting migration. And so therefore, you need it to suppress this problem. And for that to occur, you need MIR149. But MIR149 is closely linked to interferon. And therefore, if you have suppressed interferon because you needed to make spike protein, if there is a risk of cancer, you then increase that risk of it spreading to distant organs. That's essentially it in a nutshell. And this therefore means that I expected that this risk would be primarily linked to mRNA, not necessarily all COVID vaccines. I suspect we won't see the same risk with the whole virus vector, the protein based vaccines, or even the adenovirus viral vaccines. We need to do further studies on that. But this is a very, very important point. Additionally, when we look at this here, the lipid nanoparticle is what we use with RNA technology, mRNA technology, to get these these modified RNAs into cells. It is a replica of another system that the body uses called exosomes. And this is how cells communicate with each other. If they have something that they need to share, they package them up into boxes and ship them off through the mail, through FedEx or whatever, to other cells. This represents an issue because I had pointed out before that while people may think that you have the modified RNA from the injection in a muscle cell and then it's destroyed and then it's all just gotten rid of, what happens if you then have some cells packaging the same modified RNA with spike protein, shipping them off to other cells which are not targeted to make more? This could be part of the reason why we are seeing ongoing circulation of mRNA. And this principle, in terms of interferon suppression, would still increase that risk. And this is what it would look like, because these exosomes then circulate in the bloodstream, they get picked up by other cells, the cargo can get shipped around some more, and it just keeps going on and on and on. The final question that I had asked was very simple. Based on that exosomal premise, where it is being circulated from where it had been injected, but not in lipid nanoparticles, but in exosomes, what happens if a cancer cell picks it up? Suddenly, the modified RNA spike protein inside the cancer cell. In some senses, it could increase the immune targeting of the cancer cells, but in other senses, because it can have immune suppressive effects, it can increase the risk that the cancer would spread further. These are the kinds of questions that needed to have been asked early on. Let me be clear. I don't have an issue with the fact that people didn't know all of the science and they were trying to do whatever they could to save lives. That's okay. That's applauded. You do whatever you can. But when I reflect on the fact that there was no interest or almost suppression of early treatment, the fact that there was a mandate on a novel technology with a novel virus and a poor follow-up for the consequences, because you have to realize that this technically is the first study that demonstrates what we've all been saying for years. And you get censored, you get told there is no evidence. I keep on emphasizing there can be no evidence if the research is not being done. That's the problem. The research has not been done. And let me tell you this, as I pointed out before, without autopsies, we are flying blind. There are going to be other things that we need to know, we need to address, but because autopsies are not being done, or should I say not being published for us to be able to analyze them, what else have we got hidden under the carpet? It's not going to be pretty, because so far, all of the worst worries I've had seem to be coming true. And in that sense, this is another worry, predicting the viral storm. If you want to understand what I'm seeing, and remember, this could be a year or two down the line, but if we just let this go, one of the problems that I've recognized is that by the time you recognize it and you try and do something about it, it may be too late. Our opportunity to try and stop this may be now. In the same way, how many lives have been lost because we didn't act on the question? Maybe people needed earlier screening. Maybe they needed to have better follow through. There are all kinds of things that could have been done that may have mitigated what we've always thought was going to happen. We need to do better. Science, medicine has to do better. It's not good enough to say, oh, we didn't know. We could have known. We could have asked, could have looked. And when I say we, I don't mean me, because I was asking, I was looking, I got censored for it. Let's hope that the future is better, because we can't all be making the same mistakes all the time. Thank you for joining me. Remember, look out in the description for the upcoming conference, and join on Substack, and look out for our Humming Heroes book as well as we continue to develop the science. Have a great evening.
A hero, an immune adventure. Humming Heroes, your lyrical guide to the body's defenders. Now on Amazon. Check the links below.